Welcome to Geology Lab. In today's lesson, we'll be taking a look at structural geology, the deformations in Earth's crust. And so geologists are continually attempting to understand the nature of the forces that cause rocks to deform. And so in lecture, we've been talking a lot about plate tectonics, the motion of the Earth's crust, that mechanism that is trying to take that internal heat energy from the internal part of the Earth and work its way out towards the surface. Well, that is going to create several forces that we talk about on the Earth's crust and deform it. And so we do have several structures that we will talk about. And we also first want to start with the forces within the Earth. These are termed stresses. Okay, so these stresses here. They're compressive is the first one that we like to talk about. If material is getting pushed together, squeezed together, that acts to shorten the rock body. Tensile, or we call it tension, okay, tensile here, if they are pulled apart, and it would act to elongate the rock unit. And we call it shear if the material slides across one another and kind of distorts the material asymmetrically. So the shearing force as well. So these are all forces that are going to act on a rock unit. It's going to change its shape, its size perhaps, and the volume of our rock body. And so that's known as the stress. What type of force is acting on the unit? Then we have a term here called strain. And strain is the actual deformation caused by the stress. So if a rock is subjected to a stress, any one of our three varieties of stress, it is going to act in a way that it's going to respond in a way that will either be one of three varieties. And so we've got them listed here. The first one that we talk about is called elastic strain. If we have a stress that's of small and short duration, the rock deformation is not going to be permanent. When that stress is removed, the rock body is going to return to its normal size and shape. And so our last unit where we talked about the earthquakes, that would be an example of an elastic strain. Earthquake waves passing through the earth generate this type of strain, this elastic strain. Okay, is one thing they could do. We talk about being plastic type of a strain or ductile. Stress gets applied to the rock unit and it exceeds its strength. It exceeds that elastic strain. Or you can get small stresses acting on a solid rock for a long period of time, so long period of duration. The rock deformation takes place at high temperatures and pressures within the earth, and these are permanent, but the rock just kind of flows. Its size and shape is altered through folding or sort of flowing that will produce wave-like undulations called folds. So the plastic type, the ductile type of strain, will create a structure that we call folds, and we will talk about each of these in turn here. But the third type of strain is rupturing, or we call that faulting. So the stress is applied to a rock and it's beyond its limit. The rock deformation takes place under the lower temperature and pressure conditions found more near the Earth's surface, where rocks are going to behave like a brittle solid and will rupture and break. The rock is permanently altered through fractures or breaks. If the rock on either side of the fracture moves, the geologic feature is called a fault. And we will talk about the various types of fault, but there's some sort of movement, and this movement could be in a horizontal fashion, or it could be in a vertical fashion. So we do have those three types of stress, and there's a nice little figure on page 2 here showing those stresses. And of course those stresses are going to create these various types of strains, we call them, and result in various structures that we'll talk about here. But there's a nice little picture on on page 2. It would actually be your figure 7.1, just showing a nice little pictorial of the 3 different stresses. So that first one here is the compressive stress, where we're pushing together, squeezing in on the rock body, acting to kind of shorten the rock body. That's compressive. The second one here is showing, you see how these are moving away here. So we're elongating or pulling apart, and that's tensile. And the material's pulled apart, we're elongating the rock unit, okay? And then over here we've got shearing. So you see how these are each going in opposite directions, shearing past one another. Materials are sliding across one another and distort the material kind of asymmetrically there. And that's a shear type of a stress, okay? And then we'll talk about our faults and our folds in turn here. But first, before we talk about those, there's a couple terms that we do want to get underneath our belts here. And so talking about the deformations within the earth, these terms here, the tilted strata, strike, and dip. So these are 2 simple measurements that geologists use, the strike and the dip, to help define and describe the orientation or the what we would call attitude of a rock layer or a fault. The strike, this is the compass direction of the line produced by the intersection of an inclined rock layer or fault with the horizontal plane of the surface. And so there is a little picture here that might help us with that. But basically, running along here, so we've got our tilted rock body, okay, if we can see that. Tilted kind of rock body here, an outcrop of rocks. And the strike is just this imaginary horizontal plane that is striking that surface, but it's a horizontal strike, okay, coming along here. And of course that would have a direction to it. In our little example here, the strike has a 63 degrees angle to it, direction to it, okay, from the north, so kind of in a north-northwest direction. We won't be necessarily putting directions on ours, but imaginary plane cutting across in a horizontal fashion of your rock outcrop. That's the strike, and of course it has a nice horizontal location to it. Okay. The dip now, another direction, the dip. So the dip is sort of this acute angle. So what is our little angle here? So here's our outcrop. What is that dipping angle? It's tilted, right? Okay, and what is the degrees? And this particular one has a 33-degree tip, but it's the acute angle between the dipping plane and the horizontal, right? So here's the horizontal and here's the dipping, okay, angle of our rock body. And the direction of the dip, something to remember, is always perpendicular to the strike. So it's always perpendicular to the strike, okay? When we draw it, say on the map. And it's in the direction that water would flow if it ran down the plane. So we might have to imagine ourselves using a water hose, and which way is the water going to flow when we draw some of these on the map views. But that's pretty much helping us to define these two different directions, so the strike and the dip. I've also got another one here. Might be a little easier to make out than the one in your handout there, but it does sort of give us the attitude of a rock layer. So here's this strike. So we've got our tilted rock body outcrop, right? And if we just had this imaginary sheet of paper, let's say, and where does it strike our outcrop? So the horizontal, okay, plane is known as the strike, okay? And so we've got a long line there indicating the direction of the strike, and that's the horizontal line. And then the dipping angle. So here's our angle of inclination. That's the dipping angle, okay? The direction that water would go down. But notice how it's always perpendicular to the strike. That's how it gets drawn. So that's your dipping direction. So strike and then dip, okay? Dip is always perpendicular to your strike, okay? So we will actually take a look at some symbols that they use for this, just briefly. It'd be on your page 3. We'll come back to these a little later, but right here, this again, we've got the strike is the longer part, the longer line, and that short little line that is perpendicular to the strike is the direction of the dip, okay? So it tells us the direction of the strike and the direction of the dip, and kind of gives us the attitude of our rock body outcrop. So that's what the map symbol would look like. Strike and then a dip, always perpendicular to the strike. This little symbol here is if you have horizontal rock layers, meaning there's no dip whatsoever, okay? So you're just got a flat horizontal plane, okay? So there is no dip in that symbol. So it's just that circle with a cross hatch in it. This one here, this would be if you had some really severely tilted rock bodies, tilted so much that the dip is directly vertical, I mean straight down, 90-degree angle, severe tilting. And then of course the longer one is the strike direction, and they just do a kind of looks like a cross here to say when you see that symbol, you know you had severely tilted rock strata where your dip is vertical, like 90 degrees down, okay, is the dipping plane in that one. Okay, so those are a few strike and dip symbols that we use to talk about the attitude kind of our rock bodies. But let's see, back here on page, I guess it's page 2, they begin talking about some of these deformations. So the structural names to these deformations, okay? So you've got, you know, your stresses that are causing the strain, the sort of deformation. So was it elastic, was it plastic, or was it a rupturing type? And recall in the plastic, those were the ones that were going to create folds. So that's one of our structure names, folds. And the other type is a fault, where you actually do get rupturing or breaking. It really exceeded the strain limit and ruptured the material. So Our faults begin right about here, where they begin talking about the faults. And so these are fractures along which significant movement of the rock has occurred. Okay, and so this break or fracture in the crustal rocks, and some movement has occurred. So one rock body relative to another rock body, we get some movement. The surface on which this movement takes place is called the fault plane. And again, geologists do use those strike and dip little map symbols to describe the attitude of the faulting. And so those two basic types of faults are stemming from those terms, those strike and dip definitions that we talked about. And so you can either get a dip-slip fault. These exhibit vertical motion. Remember how the dip is an angle here, so vertical motion. So the slippage is along the dipping plane. So we call those dip-slip faults. Okay, those exhibit vertical movement. And the other variety is called strike-slip faults. So those exhibit a horizontal motion, okay, along the strike plane, okay, that horizontal plane. So two variety that we call, one's called a dip-slip fault and the other's called a strike-slip fault, okay. So we do have some pictures, I believe, that go with that, yes, on page 3, it starts. Okay, get that lined up here. Okay, so we'll talk about our faulting. So the first type of fault that they talk about here, okay, and remember that the faults are motion that could be along the dip or along the strike. And this first one that they talk about, your number 1 here on page 3, is the strike-slip faulting. And so strike-slip faulting is when two rock bodies slip past one another on a fault plane, okay, in a direction that gives that horizontal displacement, okay. So the movement is parallel to the strike of the fault. So strike-slip movement usually occurs on vertical or nearly a vertical kind of a fault plane, but strike-slipping. So you do have some pictures that's on your page 4, I believe. Figure 7.6 here. Okay, so horizontal displacement parallel to the strike. Okay, so remember that striking plane we talked about. Okay, horizontal displacement along a fault line. So you do get the fault line. And these varieties can either be right lateral or left lateral, they call it, depending on which direction the displacement is going. And so the way you figure out your strike slips is it's basically standing on one side of the fault line. Okay, you place yourself here on one side and you look across to the other side of the fault line. So you're on one side, and I've drawn a little X here, and you look across. And so when you do look across, what is the direction of the motion? And in this case, when we look across, the motion went to the right. Okay, so we're on this side and we're looking across, and it went to the right. So we do call that a right lateral strike-slip fault. On this one here, we're standing on this side of the fault line. Okay, we're looking across to the other side, and what was the motion? And it went left. So this is a left lateral strike-slip fault. I brought my little blocks here to see. This might help you a little bit with the motion that's going on here. So I have a block, and right along through here is the fault line. Okay, there's a break there, a fault line. So let's say our motion was like this. Okay, the motion was in a horizontal fashion. Okay, that shearing motion, and I'm on this side of the fault line and I'm looking across. So what was the direction of motion? It went to the left. So this would have been a left lateral strike-slip fault. Now, for example, if we had those back together, but the motion was this direction. Okay, here we are. We stand here and we look across the fault line. Well, the motion was to the right, and so this one would be called a right lateral strike-slip fault. So the motion is horizontal, a shearing motion. Remember, the opposite direction, that's a shear type of a stress. And the motion is horizontal along the strike of the orientation of the rocks. Okay, and so you'll figure out whether that is a right lateral or a left lateral strike-slip fault. Okay, they're often that result of that shearing stress motion. Okay, so those are your strike-slip faults. They have some dip slips here. So the next one that they talk about, so I kind of just went right back to page 3 again. Okay, or number 2 up here, the dip slip faulting. Okay, so the dip slip. Now the dip slip faulting again is the vertical movement that is along the dipping plane. So that second orientation symbol, the dip. Okay, so dip slip faulting. Two rock bodies are going to slip past each other on the fault plane, but in a direction parallel to the dip, so vertical. Okay, but that is always perpendicular to the strike, if you remember that. And the different types of dip slip faults are described by the relative motion of the blocks on the top and below the fault. We use some kind of traditional mining terms, 2 traditional mining terms to describe this, that refer to the sides of the dip slip fault. And so one is called the hanging wall. Let me move this up a little bit. So here in this first little picture, again, page 3 here, is an unfaulted mine shaft where they have gone in and they have dug around a fault line. So there's your break, okay, kind of going with the dipping plane there. And our little miner is digging through. They like to dig along the side of a fault line because that's where all the good stuff, the minerals and things are going to be that they're mining for. But notice his head, okay, is on this side of the fault line. They call that the hanging wall. That's where he used to hang their lanterns. So they call that the hanging wall. On the other side of the fault line, down where his feet are, they call that the foot wall. Okay, so depending on the direction that the hanging wall goes, does the hanging wall move up in relation to the foot wall, or does the hanging wall move down in relation to the foot wall? And we'll have our names for our variety of dip slip faulting. Gotta watch how you say that. So yeah, so they do describe those by the relative motion of the block, which way that hanging wall is going to go. Okay, so in a normal dip slip fault, this is going to occur when a tensional stress causes the hanging wall, so the top of the wall, the hanging wall up here, is going to move down relative to the foot wall. So notice in this one, this is a normal dip slip fault, and it is caused by tension. So make a note of that, tension. So anytime we pull apart the crust, you're going to get a normal type of a dip slip fault when the motion is vertical like that. Okay, hanging wall moves down. Okay, that's a normal dip slip fault. I've got my little blocks here. We've got our fault line running like this. So this part up here would be the hanging wall, just imagine where the little miner's head would be up here, the hanging wall, and his feet would be down here, okay, the foot wall. So I'm going to kind of be pulling apart here and watch what happens to the hanging wall, okay. So it's a tension now, so when you pull apart crust, okay, the hanging wall will move down. So that's a tensile type of a stress, and that creates what we call a normal. So pull apart and the hanging wall moves down in relation to the foot wall. So when the hanging wall moves down, we call that a normal dip slip fault. Normal in that it's going with gravity, so normal dip slip fault. Okay, that's the first variety, and that was through a tensional type of a stress. The next one down here, let's see if I can move that up a little bit. Okay, is a reverse dip slip fault. Okay, you might not quite see that word there, but that says compression. So the pushing together of crust, acting to kind of shorten the body, a compression type of force. Okay, when that occurs, that's going to move the hanging wall up in relationship to the foot wall. So that's known as a reverse dip slip fault. I have my little blocks here, and I was to put, remember here is the hanging wall, the little miner's head would be there and his feet would be down here. But this time if I was to push together, so a compressive type of a force, my hands kind of went together there, push together, the hanging wall would move up in relationship to the foot wall, and we do call that one a reverse dip slip fault. So I'm pushing together, compression. Okay, that will give you a normal dip slip, a reverse dip slip fault. We went against gravity basically. Hanging wall moves up in relation. Okay, so we have the normal dip slip fault from tensional stresses, hanging wall moves down, and we have the reverse dip slip fault, compressive stress, where the hanging wall moves up in relationship to the foot wall. Okay, so those are your two kind of varieties of faults. So you have the strike slip variety, and again that is a horizontal motion going along the strike. Okay, find those again. So along the strike, right, and that is a horizontal motion. Okay, and then the other variety, the dip slip variety, which I was just showing you, where that would be going along the dipping plane, and so pulling apart, hanging wall moves down, pushing together, hanging wall moves up. So normal dip slip fault or reverse dip slip fault. And just, pay attention to the type of stress that causes that. So tension for normal dip slip fault, compression for a reverse dip slip fault, and then shearing for both our varieties of the strike slip faulting, right lateral or left lateral. Both of those are from shear. So we do need to know the type of stress and the names of our structures here as well. Okay, so those varieties are the faults, but there is another variety that we talk about, the folds. Okay, and so those over here on your page 5, okay, in your handout. And the folds are coming from, if you recall, that plastic deformation. So the compressive stresses are going to form each of these, actually. So all of them. But a fold is a wave-like bend in the rock layers resulting from the compression of Earth's crust. These folds are going to form in sedimentary strata in response to compression and to accommodate the shortening of Earth's crust. There's 3 main types of folds based on their shapes. We'll be omitting that first type of the monocline. It's kind of a one-sided fold, typically occurring on flat-lying strata in sort of a stable continental area. We'll omit that one, but we will be looking at the anticline and the synclines. So an anticline is formed by the upfolding or the arching of rock layers. And you'll have the deepest rock layers in the center. And again, this is formed from compression. So I don't know how well this is going to show up here. Let's say I have my little piece of paper here, and if I push together, I can get sort of this upward arching. Let's maybe do it this way. You might not be able to see it, but upward arching. And again, I'm compressing together to get that. Okay, an upward arch. That's an anticline. You can also get a downward arch. Okay. What we call a syncline. So again, I'm pushing together, but this time I have a downward arch. Okay, that is known as a syncline. Okay, so the syncline is the downward arch. Okay, usually found in association with the anticline. So they kind of follow one another. You get the upward arch, and then you get the downward arch. Anticline, syncline, and they kind of follow each other. But they are formed by the downfolds or the troughs with the uppermost rock layers in the center. Okay, so you got a couple pictures here that are nice in your handout. Again, page 5, figure 7.7. Compressional forces do both of these. So you're pushing together, shortening the rock. The first one is the anticline. That's an upward bend in the rock strata. So the arching up. Right, so you end up getting the deepest rock layers kind of towards the center. Okay, and then the syncline. Okay, this downward bend in the rock with the uppermost rocks layers in the center. So now we got the upper layers towards the center. Here we have the deepest layers towards the center. So all those layers. So plastic type of deformation kind of causing this wave-like undulation. So response to rather long kind of duration where a rock would just actually kind of flow, okay, over time. Permanent deformation resulting from, again, compression, okay, compressional forces in both of those. So we do need to know our structure names, but we also need to know the type of stress that forms them. They put some interesting strike and dip patterns in here for us. So we were just talking a lot about strike and dip to depict an anticline on a map view. So remember that these longer lines are the strikes and the little shorter line is the dip, and these are the dip is always perpendicular to the strike. But notice how we've got a strike here and a strike here, and the little dips are going away from each other. That dip's going that way, this one's going this way, this way, this way. What that signifies to us is that we're right up here on this apex, okay, of our anticline. And imagine if we had a water hose. Remember I said we were going to get our water hose out? Pretend we're up here with a water hose and running water. And the water will go that way and it will go that way, right, away from the apex of that arch. And so when you draw your dipping planes, which way the dips are going, they're dipping away from each other, right? Dipping away from each other. That symbol right there, pattern of symbols, lets you know that you are at the apex of that anticline, and water would run that way on that side and that way on the other side. So that's a nice strike and dip pattern for an anticline. That would tell the geologists when they saw this pattern that they were dealing with an anticline. Okay. Now opposite here for the syncline, notice how we've got our strikes, right, the longer line, but notice how the dips are coming toward one another. Okay, so you'd have your strike there, but the dips, this is like we're down kind of like a bowl shape here, a trough. And say we had our water hose. Well, water's not going to run uphill, right? It can't go uphill. So the water is going together, okay, towards the center, toward each other. Okay, so that's that little strike and dip pattern there signifies a geologist could look at this map and say, oh, we have a syncline because the dips are going together. Okay, and anticline dips are going away from each other. Okay, so water here would go opposite of each other. Water here would come toward each other. So that's a nice little symbol of the strike and dip pattern that we would see, and we'll be using that a little bit later. Okay, so these are your main two types of folds, the anticlines and the synclines, but there are some variations in the fold shapes of anticlines and synclines which form some special types of folds that we call basins and domes. Okay, and so figure 6, they start talking about those, giving you a nice little picture of that. Again, this is figure 7.8, I think, or a continuation of the other figure on page 5. Okay, but here's this first one, a dome. It's a circular upward bend of the rock strata resulting from warping. But notice that the compression was circular. So it's an upward arch, similar to an anticline, but compression was circular, okay, to where it made this dome-looking shape, kind of like an upside-down bowl, if you would. Okay. Now, strike and dip pattern for that. So again, if we had a water hose at the top of this dome, okay, and we started running the water, it would run down, okay, outward, right, away from the top of that, because it can't go up against gravity, so it would be running down the side of that hill. So here we see a circular type pattern. All of our strikes are going along the circular, so strike, 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 in a circular pattern, so we know it's some sort of circular shape. But notice how the dips are all going outward, away from the apex of that circular structure. So this strike and dip pattern would signify to the geologist that we were dealing with the dome shape. Okay, and so that simple pattern lets us know we're dealing with a dome. And again, compression, but circular compression, will give us a dome. Kind of that circular upward bend of rocks, known as a dome. This one here, we call this a basin. It's circular also, but it's a downward bend of the rock strata, resulting from down warping, circular compression, with the center dropping down into a bowl shape. So this is a bowl-shaped depression, we call a basin. And again, it's circular, and so compression does do this also. But here's our pattern. So here we have circular look to it. So all the strikes are kind of making a circle shape. We'd be striking, 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 okay, the horizontal plane. And then notice how the dips on this one are all going towards the center. So if you had a water hose, all that water would be running right towards the center, running together. So that's why they have all the dips, okay, going towards the center. So a pattern like that, strike and dip pattern like that, would signify that this is a basin. Okay, so those are your categories of folds. So that plastic type of deformation that we talk about. Okay, so your anticline, syncline, basin, and dome. Okay, so it will be important to know the names of your structures, and so the various faults and the various folds. So be able to recognize those. So looking at those little figures that they give to us, being able to recognize them from a little diagram like that. Also being able to correlate the type of stress with the structures. Okay, so was it compression, pushing together? Was it tensile, or sometimes they call that tension, the pulling apart, elongation of the crust, or that shearing motion, opposite directions, shearing, that create these various structures. Okay, the next part, if you look just a little ways down here at the bottom here, it's giving you some instructions on how to create these structure models. So these little structural models that we're going to make, little boxes when they're all done is what we're going to try to create. But you'll want to take a moment here. On Blackboard, I have posted 4 of these models. So there's 4 boxes in all. These little sheets that look like this. You'll have an A block. Okay, so you'll see the letter A, and it's also an A2, an A1, A2. So that's the sheet that has A on it. This will be one that you're going to color. So pick a color for all the number 1s. So there's a number 1. Oh, here's a number 1, and so on. Color all the number 1s the same color. Here's a number 2, so color all the number 2s the same color. This one has a 3rd color, number 3, so pick a different color and color all those the same color there. And then you will be cutting out, okay, around the dark lines here. Cut all the way around. Keep the fold part here, so cut around, okay, all the way around. Keep that little fold. You're going to want that. Cut around that and all the way around. Okay. Then you'll start folding and creasing along these dark lines here. So fold along there, fold here. This one will actually end up folding inward, folding inward. Crease along there, and there. This will get folded under, so fold it in. So now we'll be creating some boxes out of these. So when it's all said and done, you'll have some box shapes like this. So I've got mine kind of color coded there. You can take a look from the side as well. So, you know, one color for all the number 2s, one color for the 3s, different color for the number 1s, sort of thing, depending on how many different colors it's asking you for on your boxes. And kind of folding in along all those folds, right? So then you'll fold that flap in using a little bit of tape as you go, and that one gets folded in, and your final one you'll have a little piece of tape kind of that goes on the outside. But you'll inside there go ahead and put little pieces of tape to kind of secure that into the box shape. Okay, so you'll want to get those printed out from Blackboard. These are located, your structural models. You've got one for B, right, the letter B on it, B1, B2, so there's like going to be 2 sides of it. And then of course there's a C box that you'll make, C, okay, and a D. So 4 sheets of paper, okay, and it'll end up giving us 2 models out of each box, you know, a side 1 and a side 2. for each box. But go ahead, take a moment if you need to pause and go get those printed out, colored up, cut out around it, and it's kind of telling you some directions there on how to get those models put together, folding, get it in the box shape, putting little pieces of tape as you go, and then get that all folded up and created. Okay, so you'll have several boxes that we can start looking at. Okay, and then, so take a moment if you need to and get that put together. Okay. So what we'll be doing with our boxes then is to create several things here. We're going to end up taking a look at our structures and trying to decide what particular structure that is. So in this first column, and notice how we have A1, A2, B1, B2. So there's two sides on the box that we'll be looking at. And we'll do this for each of the boxes. So we'll end up having 8, A1, A2, B1, B2, etc. We're going to do a little sketch of that. So we'll be taking a look, orienting our box with the letter and number in the lower right hand corner. Orient it like that, and then we'll be drawing a sketch of the top, what we see on our box, and the side views. Okay. So we'll get our sketches all put together, and then we'll put in that strike and dip pattern. So I'll walk you through the strike and dip pattern. We saw a little bit of that when we were talking about the folds for the anticline, synclines, basin, and dome, but we'll be putting that in for each of our sketches. And then the type of stress. So of those 3 types of stresses, is it the compression? Is it tension or tensile, or is it shear? Okay, so we'll want to know our name of our structure, strike and dip, and the stress that creates that structure. And so that's what we're going to be working on. That's going to be our task. Okay, so my boxes look just a little bit different. They actually look a little more like land, I guess you could say, on there. But this is my A1. So you would orient your box with the letter A1 in the lower right hand corner when you look at this. Okay, yours may end up looking something like that. That's my A1. We're going to want to look at the top, yes, but also the front portion and a little bit of the side. My box here has seen better days, but a little bit of the side there on it. And then you're going to be drawing in a sketch of that. Okay, and so, yeah, if we were to hold that a little bit like this, okay, basically you're going to be putting your right hand thumb on it, okay, so that you can see the top view, the front view, and a little bit of that side view to make your sketch for. Okay, so that's what we're working on with this first one here. So that is what I have come up with for the first one. So we're just looking at A1 right now. Okay. The sketching view for this. So yes, if you've oriented your box with the A1 at the bottom lower right hand corner, just kind of like that, and we get a little bit of the side view, and we get that top view as well, so kind of orient it like that. Okay, so we're seeing the different layers. Kind of the dotted pattern on our sketch. The one you have has dots on it. It's sort of this mottled looking like rock material there, but these are all different rock layers. Okay, and so they're using kind of a dotted pattern loosely dotted pattern, a heavily dotted pattern, different sized dots to create then those different layers of rock, okay, is what they're doing in each of these, okay. So then we can take a look at, well, what's happening with our rock layers, okay? What is the shape, the structure is what we're trying to get at by doing these little sketches. Okay, so yes, you'll need to pause the video so that you can get these sketches done. But of course we're going to do that for each one of them. So you may want to go ahead and just do all of them. So you'll have all your sketches as we get going talking about it. The next thing you're going to want to do is put in, for your strike and dip patterns, you're going to want to put in just the top view, okay, of your block. Okay, so this time we're just looking at the top view. Okay, so we have like that dotted pattern, the blank one, dotted, blank, dotted kind of thing. So just the top view for your strike and dip portion. Okay, so yes, you're going to want to run through and get those all done. Then I'm going to kind of go through them quickly as if you'd already done your drawings. So do take a moment if you need to. Okay, so on our first one, A1, we are looking at a pattern here where we're seeing a downward arching of the rock layers, and right here an upward arching of the rock layers. So the name of our structure, we actually have a little combo here, would be a syncline followed by an anticline, right? The syncline is the downward arching bend and rock, and the anticline is the upward arching in the bend of rock. So you really do need the side view for that, right? Because if you're just looking at the top view, you can't make out that that is arched, okay, or down warped. So we do need a little bit of that side view in there. Okay, so the name of our structure would be syncline, anticline. It's actually two structures. But in nature, they do that. They follow one another because of that force coming in on them. It actually will get that wave-like undulation happening. And what was our type of stress that created the syncline and the anticline? Both of them. If you recall that, that was the compressional forces that did both, right? So it did an anticline or a syncline. Actually did both. So let me see if I can side by side here get those. But basically you had compression, so I'm kind of pushing together here on my little piece of paper, arching that upward, compression. Also, if I do compression, I can get a downward arch as well, okay, a down warping. So in either case, I was getting compression forming either the syncline or the anticline. So your type of stress, which is what you're filling out on your handout, is compression for both cases there. Okay, and then moving over to the strike and the dip pattern, a little explanation for that. If you recall, we did look at strike and dip patterns back on an earlier page, and it showed that we had that longer line, that longer symbol was the strike, okay, and the strike, let's go back to that page 3 real quick, okay. The longer line is your strike direction, and then the short one is the dipping direction, the way that water would flow, if you remember that. So we're going to be putting in some strikes, just enough to get the orientation of the land, and a dip. And remember that the dip is always perpendicular to the strike. So there's your strike, there's your dip. So no matter which way the strike is oriented, your dip's always going to be perpendicular to the strike. And just recall that this symbol is used for horizontal rocks that don't have a dip at all. So that'll be coming in handy a little later. And then this one is for severely tilted rock layers with a vertical dip, a little cross-looking symbol there. So we'll be using these symbols when needed, when appropriate, to fill in the strike and dip pattern for each of our sketches. So we've sketched just now the top view of your box over here, right? So we're just going to have the top view of the box. Okay, so what we're thinking about here is that we're going to put in our strikes. So there, of course, imaginary horizontal line that's going to strike, okay, the bedrock, just an imaginary line for your outcrop. And then the important thing is going to be, well, which direction are we going to put the dipping angles? They're always perpendicular to the strike, but why do I have those two pointing towards each other, dipping towards each other? And here I have two strikes, but then I have the dips away from each other. And we did kind of show you that back on a figure when we talked about the anticlines and the synclines, the basins and the domes, on the direction water was going to flow. So if you notice off over on this side, we are on the edge of a syncline, okay, so a trough-like shape. So we're up over on the edge of it here. Okay, so here we'd have our strike, striking north-south, and then the dip would go towards the right, okay, because we're on the edge here of a trough. Water would flow towards the center, right? Water's not going to go uphill, so it's going to flow towards the center, which is towards the downhill area. So that's why the dip is to the right on that one. You notice here we're at the base of the trough now, so we're over in this area, base of the trough in this one. And so I've got two strikes with the dips going towards one another. That little pattern, that little symbol of strike and dip with two strikes and the dips going toward each other indicates that you're at the very base of the trough. So you're here at the bottom of the trough when you put two together like that and they're pointed towards each other. So a geologist could see just this map. They wouldn't even have the sketch, but they could just look at this map, and because of the orientation of those symbols, two strikes with the dips going toward each other, that would signify to them that that is a syncline, the very base of the trough of the syncline. Okay, so now this layer, we're over here. We're up over here on the other side of that trough, okay? And so we would have a strike with the dip going to the left this time, okay? So this is downward, so it would go towards the center of the trough. It's not going to go uphill. Water can't go uphill. It's got to go downhill with gravity. So that dip goes off to the left. Okay. Then the next layer over, here we are. We are at the top of that anticline. So if I put in my other box here, and we are at the top of that anticline, right? Right up here on that layer. Okay. So for that one, notice how we have two strikes, right? And then the dips are going away from each other, opposite of each other. That's signifying that we are at the apex of this arch, top of the arch. Pretend we have a water hose. Water's going to run off that way, and it's going to run off that way, right? Both downhill here. This is the top of a hill. And so that's why the dips are away from each other. That signifies an anticline, that you're at the apex of that top of the arch, the anticline. Okay? Two strikes and the dips go outward, away from one another. Next one over. Okay, so now we're still kind of on the edge of this arch. Okay? And so water would run off to the right. Okay? It can't go uphill, so it has to run off to the right direction. So your strike and then your dip goes off to the right on that one. So this is box A, the front side of box A, A1, right? Okay. That one, so syncline, anticline, right? And then we put in our strike and dip pattern. And we did mention that the type of stress is compression on that one. Okay, so when you fill in your box here, you're saying that the name of the structure, anticline, syncline, you made your sketch, you put in your strike and dip pattern, and you noted that the stress was compression, okay, because compression does both an anticline and a syncline. It will form that type of structure. Okay, that was A1. Now, if you take your A box and you flip it over, okay, you'll have an A2, a number A2. And so you want to orient it so that the A2 is in the lower right-hand corner, okay? And you see the top of it. You want to see a little bit of the front and then the side view as well, okay? And we will make a sketch of that for A2. We're going to figure out what their structure name is. We're going to put in that strike and dip pattern. So for strike and dip pattern, all you want is the top view. Okay, so make sure you're taking time to get those sketches done. And then we're going to arrive at the type of stress that is. So let's take a look at our A2. Okay, here's A2 now. Okay. All right, so for A2 now, okay, so we've got sort of a blank one, a heavily dotted one, okay, and follow it along, heavily dotted kind of thing, and then a clear bed, heavily dotted, and a clear bed, heavily dotted one. Okay, ends up being my heavily dotted here, looks like rock, which these are all rock layers, but they're different layers of rock. Okay, and then along the side we had heavily dotted along the side a little bit too. Okay, so orienting that, make sure you got the box where the A2 is down in the right hand corner like that, and you're getting to see a little bit of the front and then that side view as well. Okay, so when you look at that, we're starting to see a little, again, downward arch of the strata, right? This downward arch, and an upward arch, okay? Upward arch. So we're getting sort of that trough of the syncline and the arching upward of the anticline. So the folding again. So these again is a little duo of the syncline and then the anticline once again. So those are the names of our structures. Syncline, anticline, just like on side A1, but this is the second side. Okay, then let's scoot over. So we got our structure name. Let's put in our strike and dip symbols. Okay. So again, we're going to work our way kind of from one side and work our way to the other side, looking at each layer in there. So to start off with, this layer over here matches this one here, okay, that thin kind of narrow one on the side there. Well, again, so if you look at the front of this, this is part of a syncline, so a downward trough. So we're up over here on the edge of that trough, and so we'll put our strikes in. Okay, again, a north-south trending strike. You could put it, you know, several. They're all striking in the same direction. But we've got to figure out the dipping direction. And so if we're over on the edge of the trough and we had our water, it would go off to the right. So we've got our little dip here going on the right. And again, always perpendicular to the strike. That's how you draw your dips. Here we are in a little layer that's getting closer to the very bottom of that trough, but not quite. So we're over here on this edge, midway down to our syncline, base of our syncline there. And water again would be going towards the center, so off to the right there. So one strike here and the little dip going to the right. Here, this symbol, this little combo of two strikes with the dips going toward one another signifies that you're at the base of that trough. So you're right at the bottom of that trough. Okay, and water would be going from that side and that side toward one another. So the two strikes with the dips going toward one another signifies the base of that syncline. And then this dotted layer, we're off over here on the other side of the syncline. Water's going to want to roll towards that downward arch, right? So it's going to go off to the left this time. So your strike, and then you're dipping off to the left, down towards that trough area. Water would flow. The next one, as we continue over, we are on the little, this white line, or yeah, non-dotted bed over here. And again, it's going to go off to the left, okay, because you're up on the other edge of the syncline now. So water's still going to want to run that way. Remember, we're going up here. Water's not going to go uphill. It only goes downhill, okay. So that's that one. Then as we get over to this next dotted bed, here we are at the apex of the anticline of that arch. And so this bed goes with this one right here. So we're at the very apex, and so that little combo there, two strikes with the dips going outward, signifies that you're at the apex of the anticline. So if we had our water hose here and we ran it, yeah, water's going to go that way in opposite directions, okay, towards downhill. So that's your signifying your anticline, okay. And then the next bed over is this one here. We're on the edge of that arch, okay, and so water's going to want to run off that direction. It can't go uphill, right? It can't go uphill, so it's going to run downhill, which would put it a strike with the dip going off to the right here, or off to the east, north, south, east, west, north, south, east, west, okay, but dipping off to the right there. But get a feel for that. You do need to be looking at your structures and imagining which way would the water flow in order to arrive at the proper placement of your dip, okay, structures for the map view. Okay, so that's the strike and dip pattern for box A2. And again, so this is a syncline anticline structure. So that would be what type of stress? So you need to fill that in on your page 7 for box A. Okay. Syncline, anticline, got your sketch, put in your strike and dip, and the type of stress. Once again, compression forms both a syncline and an anticline. Okay. On our next one, so we've got box B now. Find my box B. And we'll start with, of course, B1, and then we'll work our way to B2. So let's see, this one is my B1. So we take a look at that. That's the top view. Here's the side view. So you've got several layers. That's kind of why we did the color coding, so that we could see the various layers, okay, of our blocks, and really make out the different rock layers that way, so that you could tell that the orange ones were once together. This brown one, I mean different colors, whatever color scheme you used, you made it beautiful. And this used to be together. So it helps us to see those various rock layers, okay? And then now there's some motion that happened along those rock layers. So you do want to orient that so that you've got B1, okay, oriented properly there for the boxes that we're going to be using. Okay, so if you need to take a moment, go ahead and get those sketches done. Okay, for B1, so we'll orient that B1 in the lower right-hand corner there. And if you'll notice, we do have a fault line running along, okay? A break or a fracture in the rock, so we do have a fault. And we had a variety of faults that we talked about earlier. And this one if you notice that slant, okay, there is motion that has occurred along that dipping plane. So remember how the dipping plane is the vertical direction of an outcrop, and then there's been motion. You can tell that there's been motion because this layer and this layer used to be together, and then that layer and that layer used to be together, and so there has been motion that has occurred. So actually it's this west side over here that has gone up and over, moved up and over this east side over here, okay? As we can see, it kind of moved up and over. And so this would be a variety of a dip-slip fault, okay, where the motion is got some vertical attitude to it. And we got to decide now, is this a normal dip-slip fault or a reverse dip-slip fault? And if you recall those, remember how we used the little miner's face up here, his head up here, that's the hanging wall on this side of the fault where he would hang his lantern, and down here where his feet would be. So if you have to draw your little stick figure person, so his head up here and then his little stick feet down here on this side of the fault, do that. It really does help. But so we've got the hanging wall up here and the foot wall down here, and there has been motion. Okay, so what I've got here are my blocks again. Okay, so here would be the hanging wall and there would be the foot wall, and this west side of the block has gone up and over, so we're kind of coming together here, and that one went up and over, so the hanging wall moved up in relationship, so it moved up. And so that's why we're seeing the difference here of those layers. Let me see if this one will show it a little bit better. So here, those two orange layers used to be together, dark brown, light brown, used to be together. Okay, they were together like this, okay, and then the hanging wall here moved up in relationship. Okay, so that kind of changed our position of our rock layers in there, and so hanging wall moved up in relationship. Remember, that's the hanging wall side. That's the foot wall side. So you do have to be able to look at those layers from your box and in your sketch and recognize that this would be, so when hanging wall moves up, what type of dip-slip fault was that? We know it was a dip-slip fault because we have that vertical kind of motion. But the variety is what we call the reverse dip-slip fault. That would be the name of our structure, all of that. Reverse dip-slip fault. And do you recall the type of stress that causes that? So when I was doing that here, I was actually pushing my hands together, okay, to get that. Remember the normal one was where you tensile and the hanging wall would move down. But this one I'm pushing my hands together, compression, okay, and the hanging wall would move up in relationship. So that would be the reverse dip-slip fault's the name of your structure, and compression is the stressor, okay, the stress. Now, our strike and dip pattern's pretty simple, a lot less complex than the anticline syncline that we were using in box A. But for this one, okay, get that out of there. We had some symbols back on page 3. I mentioned when you had a horizontal rock layer that didn't have a dip, right? Because these are just flat. So when you look at the top view here, these are flat. They're not arching like the anticline syncline. So these are just flat. And so for that symbol, it was the circle with kind of the cross hatch in the middle there. So back on page 3, show you that real quick. This one here, so horizontal rock layers with no dip, is this pattern. So we would just put enough of that in there that we would get the feel that this is a horizontal rock layer. So one will suffice there, okay, to let the geologist know that that's flat, okay, because he really can't see this view of the sketch. All he's seeing is this top view, okay, and so that tells him this is just a flat surface here. And I went ahead here just to show the direction of the slant, okay, of that fault line, what direction this fault line is going, since they can't see that front view. And that's it for strike and dip. That's very simplified. So when you have a dip slip type of a fault, you've got those flat layers there. That's pretty simple for strike and dip. And that should suffice for strike and dip. Okay, so name a structure. Back on that page here for box B, B1. Okay, name your structure. Reverse dip slip fault. Okay, you had your sketch. You put in your strike and dip, right? Just the little horizontal rock layer symbols. And I just put a little arrow for the slant. And our type of stress, right? Our type of stress, compression for that. Okay, so let's flip our box over. Okay, and this time we're looking at the orientation of B2. So now we're working here. Make sure you got it oriented right. Top view is pretty simple. We got one layer here and then a little narrow dotted bed there. This gets a little busier on the side, right? So you've got a sort of tan layer and then the dark brown layer and then that orange layer. Okay, you have the dipping plane here where the fault line is running through, and there is motion. There has been motion along that again, right? Because these used to be together, and the dark brown used to be together, and the orange used to be together. So there has been motion again. So we know that this is a dip slip fault, but what type? Okay, so recognize where your hanging wall is, right there. Little miner's head would be up here and his feet would be right down here on the other side of the fault. And so what has happened? Did the hanging wall move up or down in relationship to the footwall? It has moved up once again, okay? And so here's our little scenario, and here I am pushing together, and that hanging wall has moved up. Okay, so that orange layer up here, it moved up. It used to be down here with this one, and it moved up. So that's kind of how you'll be able to determine if your hanging wall has moved up or not. Okay, and in this case, once again, the hanging wall has moved up, so that was called a reverse dip slip fault once again for B2. That's the name of your structure. Okay, and then so let's put in our sketches. Going to be kind of similar to the B1, right? So here's B2. Again, we're seeing just sort of that flat surface there, right? This non-dotted bed here, and then a strip of dotted bed. Continues on the side a little bit there, and your front view. And so yes, you're going to put in all your little patterns using your block. And then the strike and dip pattern, pretty simple for block B. Again, we've got just a horizontal flat surface, so we put in the little circle with the crosshatch in it, one in each bed. That'll give us an idea of the orientation or attitude of the rock layers, that they are flat. No dipping plane there. It's just a flat horizontal surface. And then the arrow just kind of signifying what direction the slant of the fault line goes is what that little arrow signifies. Okay. So again, that west side of the crustal rocks went up and over the eastern side there in a reverse dip slip fault. Okay. All right, so now we didn't get a chance to see the normal fault, right? So we've been looking at both examples, side 1 and side 2, was this reverse dip slip fault. You might see a normal dip-slip fault drawing on the exam, even though we didn't have one in our crustal blocks here, our models. But that would indicate the hanging wall would move down. So you'd have to pay attention to what happened to the hanging wall for that. But that could be a possibility for that. So again, for letter B2, we're going to have the reverse dip-slip fault. Got your structure, got your dip and strike patterns, pretty simple for those. And again, compression is your type of stress for that. Block B. Okay, let's take a look at block C then. That's going to be your next page where that one comes in. If I can find it. Here we go. So it kind of continues over here with C1 and then the flip side C2 and then D1 and D2. Okay, so for C1 we're going to need to orient that where C1's down here, right? Get that oriented so that you're seeing the top of the box. It's got several layers in there, okay? And you color coded them nicely so that you could see that this box or block and this one go together. Mine's darker brown, but yours will have certain patterns on it. And those go together at one time, and this one went together at one time. But then there's been some motion that's happened along there. Okay? And so this is more of motion that is horizontal. It's not vertical like in block B, which would have been along the dipping plane. This motion is along the strike. Okay? So it's a fault. We've got the fault line, and then we have motion, but it's a horizontal motion. Okay? So it's not along a dipping plane. Okay, so here are my blocks, right? So we're not getting motion vertically like we were doing in those dip slips, but this one is motion that's, one way or another, and we're going to determine which, but in a horizontal along the strike. Okay, there's a fault line, but the motion is along the strike, horizontal fashion. Okay, so make sure that you get that oriented and you see the top, a little bit of the front, and the side view for your box C1, and get that sketched in. Let me grab mine. And we'll see how we're going to put in strike and dip patterns for this one. Okay, so here is C1. Okay, so you got all your various layers in here, right? And we know that this is going to be a strike slip. We have a fault line, and we do have motion because, like I said, this bed used to be together, this one used to be together, that heavily dotted one, and this sparsely kind of large dotted one. Those used to be together. So we know we have had motion, okay, along that strike horizontal fashion. So this is a strike slip. And we had two varieties of strike slips. One is a right lateral strike slip, the other a left lateral strike slip. So we've got to determine the motion to the right or to the left. And if you recall, I said for those you need to be standing on one side of the fault line. So that is your fault line. You stand on one side of the fault line and you look across to the other side of the fault line and you determine, was the motion to the right or to the left? Okay, and so that's how you determine if it's right or left. So here we are standing here on this side, and we look across. So we notice here, this bed was once here, now it's gone this way. That's to the right. Here, and that was to the right. And same thing, to the right. So this motion has been to the right, okay? In every case, all of them moved to the right. So this is a right lateral strike slip fault. And honestly, it doesn't matter which side of the fault line you're on. Let's pretend we're on this side of the fault line and we're looking across this way. Okay? Again, everything moved to the right. So this bed moved to the right, to the right, to the right. So honestly, you could be on either side of the fault line, but you're looking across and determine your direction. So this is a right lateral strike slip fault. That is its full structural name. Okay, let's put in some strike and dip patterns for this type of structure. So the strike and dip, if you remember again back on page 3, these are some severely tilted. It's like they've been tilted up and down, basically, severely tilted to the point that the dips are going to be at a 90-degree angle. So when you get those lateral strike slips, you've got some severe deformation, tilting of your rock layers to the point that you've got a vertical dip or a 90-degree dipping plane. I mean, it's like straight up and down. So for those, we're going to use this long cross with a cross hatch indicating that that's a vertical dip. Okay, so that's what we'll use, and we'll just put enough, one in each box. A little structure there is going to be plenty, and we would be striking this time in an east-west direction. That would be where a horizontal, just imaginary plane would be striking, right? And this time it's in that east-west direction. And you just put your strikes in, and then the little crosshatch through it, indicating this is a very, very steep dipping angle of a 90-degree. There's one in here, you can't quite see it. I just put enough, one in each block, okay, little crustal layer, so that you get the idea of the orientation there. Okay, so severely tilted layers, and then we want to put in a little arrow to signify the direction of the motion. And so this layer went off to the right, and this one in the opposite direction, because that gives us that stress, that shearing past one another in opposite directions. So shear is what creates the lateral strike slip faults. Okay, so this one ended up being a right lateral strike slip fault. See how everything went to the right when you look across the fault line. So right lateral strike slip fault, and that's a very simple strike dip pattern for that. Okay, so that was C1. And then let's flip that over and take a look up C2 then. C2. So for that, again, it's looking kind of similar to the one before, but make sure you get a little bit of everything in there in your sketches. Okay, for C2 now. Okay, a little bit of all of it, front and side view. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that one for C2 now. Looking kind of similar to the one before. Okay, but again, we're going to need to figure out, is this right lateral or left lateral kind of thing. So we see that we've got that, fault line running through there, and that there has been motion in a horizontal fashion. Okay, so here's my little X where we're standing here and we're looking across the fault line. This time when we do that, we notice that this, kind of sparsely large dotted bed, it actually moved off to the left. Heavily dotted bed, again, to the left. It's kind of sparsely dotted here, bed, to the left. So the motion of this crustal block here across the fault line was to the left. So this is a left lateral strike slip fault. That's the name of the structure. Okay. And again, it's that shearing motion, that shearing stress that causes these strike slips. Okay, pretty simple for the strike and dip pattern. So again, we've got severely tilted, a dip that is at a 90-degree angle, so we're going to use that symbol with a really long strike, striking east-west, put one in each little rock layer. We call them beds. And then the tiny little crosshatch indicating that that is a vertical dip. I mean, it's like straight up and down, okay, dip. And then I've just put in some arrows to show the motion of our dipping plane. So we have then as our name the left lateral strike slip fault. Remember, shearing, yeah, is the stress, and you've got your sketch and your strike and dip pattern for block C, C2. Okay. All right, so let's move along and let's take a look at block D then. Okay, something different going on block D here. So here's the D1 orientation, right? We have something circular, definitely circular in shape, but then we do need to have a look at the side view. Okay, there's the front view, a little bit on the side. This is definitely going to help us because we're seeing this downward arch, downward arch. So we definitely have a circular shape that dips downward. Okay, so out of our folds that we talked about, we had a couple special types of folds. These circular shapes that either were downward like a basin or a trough, bowl shape, or we had them where they domed upward. So our basins and our domes. And so in D1 here, you do kind of need that side view to tell that that would be a basin, seeing how the rock layers are folding kind of downward, but in a circular fashion. And so this was a dome. I'm sorry, a basin. Get those mixed up. D1 basin, because it's going downward in the circular shape. So basin for D1. And let's take a look at the sketch for D1. Okay, so you're doing each layer, having that oriented just right, and yours does have several, a dotted bed in the center, and then a clear bed, another dotted bed. Like that, and then you get a piece of the side here, heavily dotted, then sparsely dotted, then a clear bed kind of thing with that pattern. Okay, and do your sketch for that. That does help you to see that this is a basin. You need the side view to really be able to tell that that's a basin. Strike and dip, very interesting. Now we did talk about the strike and dip a little bit for basin and dome a little earlier. So basically we are putting enough strikes, so the longer line is a strike, and you can see that that's going circular. Okay, and then the dips. So what direction are those dips going to go in? Again, we're putting enough strikes in there to get the feel of the attitude that that is circular. Dips. So pretend we have our water hose and we're running that water hose in essentially like a bowl shaped, okay, the basin. All the water is going to want to run towards the center. Okay, so when we put the dips, which are always perpendicular to the strikes, remember that, we'll put in enough of those to get that feel that they're all going towards the center, dipping direction towards the center here of our basin. Okay, so not too complicated for the strike and dip pattern for those. Okay, and that was D1. So it's a basin, name of the structure, and what type of stress formed that. If you remember, with our folds, compression is our stress that forms those, and this is basically a circular compression. Compression coming in at all sides to create that basin. So circular compression could be your stress on that. Okay, so let's take a look then at the flip side. So now we're going to look at D2. Okay. So now we're orienting our box this way, kind of similar, right? But now let's look at the side view. Look how that's arching upward. Arching upward. Okay, it's circular definitely, but it arches upward. So this one would be the dome. Okay, that one's like an upside down bowl where you have a domal top kind of to it. Circular, but yet domal, okay, in shape. So here would be our D2 sketch. Okay, again, trying to follow that pattern that they're showing us here on the block, right? Getting it oriented like that. So clear bed there, heavily dotted bed, sparsely dotted bed, and then another clear bed, just to get your layers in there. And then the side view. Okay, definitely an upward arch, and so circular, that's going to give us a dome. So there's your nice sketch for that. And then here, the strike and dip pattern. We're just looking at the top view now. Okay, and so our geologists can't tell what's going on from the side. So we put in the strike and dip on the map view here to give the attitude and the orientation of this. And so what we're doing is we're putting enough strikes in there, kind of going along the lines of the beds, but it's in circular, okay, in a circular fashion. Notice the dips, which are always perpendicular to your strikes, right? That never changes. But the directions are all outward, right? Because here we are at the top of a dome, okay, this domal hill looking shape. And we got a water hose. Water is going to want to go off in all directions outward, right? Water can't go uphill, so it's going to be going downhill all the way outward, away from the center. And so that's why we're putting in enough strike and then the dips all going outward in this circular motion so that you get the feel of the attitude and the orientation of the rock bed, which is circular and then dipping outward, okay, away from the center. So that would be your strike and dip pattern on that. And again, to create that special type of fold known as a dome, we do have circular compression as the stress for that. So do make sure that you have filled in each of your little drawings, right? Your sketch and your strike and dip pattern, and then that one would be circular compression, and that one would be for the dome for D2. So we've made it through all of our crustal blocks in there. Hopefully you've taken some good notes and gotten these sheets all filled in. So that's concluding the structural geology unit. I do want to put under here the study guide for the exam, which will include the earthquake unit, which we talked about that in that lecture video. So you might want to go back and take a look at that on how to do that. But then for this unit, the structural geology unit, you want to make sure that you're familiar with the three types of stresses that are used to describe the forces that act on the rock unit and change its shape and or volume. So compression, tension or tensile, and shear. So maybe I'm going to give you just a little picture, maybe one of the figures from the handout, and put those on the test, and that you can identify what compression is, what tension is, and what shear is. And then the second bullet, so make sure that you can distinguish between the various types of faults and folds. And again, these might be little images from your handout, straight out from your handout, that I'm putting a picture and I'm asking you, okay, What is the structure? So is it a fault? And if it's a fault, what kind? Right lateral strike slip, left lateral strike slip. Is it a dip slip of some sort? So normal dip slip fault or reverse dip slip fault, okay? Or is it a fold? So what kind of fold? Anticline, syncline, basin or dome are our choices on these folds. So yeah, be able to distinguish between those structures, okay? And then down here, the sketches. So I'll have some pictures of sketches of various models, so like the little blocks we were using. You need to be able to name the geologic structure. So is it a fold? If so, what kind? Is it a fault? If so, what kind? Okay, so the structures we talked about. The type of stress that produces that deformation, so that structure. So again, we're referring to compression, tension, or shear that produced it. And determine the strike and dip patterns of the structure. So all that we had just gone through with our 4 structural model blocks, there were 2 sides to each one. So the 8 that we looked at, the strike and the dip pattern. So I could ask you a question, give you some choices of a strike and dip pattern, and you could arrive at the correct pattern from what we had talked about for the various structures, what the map image would look like to a geologist to help them figure out, just from the map view and the strike and dip pattern, what that geologic structure is. Okay, so a lot with the last couple pages, pages 7 and 8, is what this is pertaining to. So hopefully you can do all that. And certainly if you have any questions about any of this, make sure that you do get with me. It is important for you to do the drawings yourself, those sketches, your strike and dip patterns, and get a feel for that. It really does help you to understand the process better. So that's going to conclude our geology lab. So I thank you very much.